It's almost surreal watching America's most powerful CEOs panic, not over inflation, not over supply chains, not even over the economy, but over one man demanding basic dignity for workers. And here's the part they don't want you to know: their panic isn't random. It's a reaction to something far more threatening than legislation. It's a reaction to a shift in power, a shift in narrative, and a shift in who gets to decide how wealth in this country is shared. Zohran Mamdani didn't propose anything radical. He didn't call for a revolution. He simply said, if corporations can record profits, workers deserve record respect. And somehow, that single idea sent boardrooms into meltdown. Why? Because they know what happens when the public starts asking the right questions. They know what happens when workers realize their value. Tonight, we break down exactly why corporate elites are terrified, and what their panic reveals about the future of American labor. Let's start with the moment everything shifted. The moment corporate America went from comfortable, predictable confidence to visible discomfort. Not because Zohran Mamdani threatened to burn down the economic system, not because he called for some ideological revolution, but because he did something far more dangerous to them. He told the truth calmly, publicly, and without flinching. At a legislative hearing packed with workers, corporate lobbyists, and reporters, Mamdani laid out a set of worker-first policies so grounded in basic fairness that the lobbyists sitting behind him actually stiffened in their chairs. You could see it on video. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't resort to theatrics. He simply said, if this state can incentivize corporate expansion with tax breaks, it can guarantee the people who make those companies profitable a dignified life. And then he listed the policies, one by one. Higher wage floors tied to cost of living, not corporate convenience. Limits on abusive scheduling, especially in industries where on-call means no life. Anti-union busting protections, so workers aren't threatened into silence. Affordable housing requirements for companies receiving subsidies, so they can't drain a community while giving nothing back. Community reinvestment rules, ensuring corporations benefiting from public resources actually contribute to public good. These weren't abstract concepts. They were lifelines. Lifelines for the warehouse worker sleeping in his car between shifts. For the home care aide juggling 3 clients while barely affording groceries. For the fast food worker who can't predict next week's schedule, let alone next month's rent. And here's the emotional core of this moment. Mamdani wasn't attacking corporations, he was defending the people corporations pretend not to see. The delivery driver speeding through rain at midnight. The cashier who smiles through exhaustion. The warehouse worker who only becomes visible to management when productivity dips. That's what made CEOs furious. Not the policies themselves, they've fought those for decades, but the framing. Mamdani made their exploitation unmistakable. He held up a mirror, and for once, the country saw the truth reflected back. Then came the ignition moment, the spark. When Mamdani said, almost casually, record profits should come with record responsibility, the corporate PR machine snapped awake. Lobbyists exchanged glances. Phones lit up. And by the next morning, the statements began pouring in. Business associations scolded him. Chambers of commerce warned of economic ruin. Corporate spokespeople called the proposals anti-business, dangerous, even job-killing. It was the same script they always use, the same lines they pulled out when workers asked for a weekend, when children demanded safety laws, when unions asked for a living wage. The same lines they use every time wealth is asked to share even a fraction of its power. Except this time, their outrage didn't match reality. How do you call a proposal job-killing when your own company announces record revenues the same week? How do you plead poverty while approving million-dollar bonuses? How do you claim worker protections are unaffordable when shareholders just celebrated the highest quarterly payout in your company's history? You can't. Not honestly, anyway. And that's why this chapter matters. Mamdani didn't just challenge corporate policy, he challenged corporate mythology. The mythology that says exploitation is normal, that low wages are inevitable, that workers should be grateful for scraps. By speaking plainly, calmly, confidently, he disrupted more than an economic model. He disrupted a hierarchy, one that survives only if workers stay silent. And once that silence is broken, well, that's when real panic begins. If you really want to understand why corporate CEOs are melting down over Zohran Mamdani's worker-first agenda, you have to understand the unwritten rulebook they've operated under for decades. It's not printed anywhere. You won't find it in an MBA textbook or a corporate ethics manual. But every executive in America knows it by heart. Here's the rule. As long as workers stay divided and policy stays complicated, CEOs stay in control. That's the whole game. Keep workers competing with each other instead of organizing with each other. Keep policies wrapped in technical jargon so no ordinary person can follow the debate. Keep the public believing that wage floors, union protections, and housing affordability are too complex, too messy, or too expensive to change. This system works beautifully for them, until someone like Mamdani steps in and flips the board. Because Mamdani didn't make this about corporate spreadsheets or economic models. He made it about morality. He asked a painfully simple question that cuts through all the noise. Who deserves dignity? Not what does the market demand. Not what does the data suggest. Not what does the Chamber of Commerce approve. Just, do workers deserve basic dignity, yes or no? That's the kind of question that terrifies the elite. Because when a debate becomes moral instead of technical, ordinary people suddenly understand their own power. And once that happens, the corporate script falls apart. So the CEOs panicked, fast. You could see the machinery activating in real time. PR firms scrambling to craft urgent talking points. Business councils warning of uncertainty, their favorite word when they don't want to admit they're afraid. Financial analysts predicting reduced competitiveness, which is code for shareholders might get slightly less obscene profits. They weren't responding to a threat to the economy. They were responding to a threat to their dominance. Take a look at corporate reactions anytime worker-first policies gain momentum. It's a predictable cycle. Discredit the proposal. This will hurt innovation. This will destroy small businesses. This will kill jobs. Even when they are reporting record quarterly profits. Create panic among the public. Suddenly, every news outlet funded by corporate advertisers starts hinting that workers asking for dignity might collapse the economy. Pressure lawmakers quietly while performing concern publicly. CEOs pretend to care about workers in statements. Meanwhile, their lobbyists fight those workers behind closed doors. But the real fear, the thing that genuinely keeps them awake at night, is something deeper. Once one state adopts stronger worker protections, others start asking for them too. And when that happens, the whole model shifts. If New York requires corporations to reinvest in communities, then why shouldn't California? If one state links tax breaks to fair scheduling, how long before others follow? If workers in one region realize their labor has value, how long before workers everywhere realize it? That's the domino effect CEOs dread. And this brings us to a very human truth they don't want to admit. When CEOs panic, it's almost never about people. It's about profits, margins, control. If workers are paid fairly, executives lose leverage. If workers have stable schedules, executives lose flexibility. If workers can afford to live near their jobs, executives lose the threat of replaceability. So yes, CEOs are panicking. Not because Mamdani is extreme, but because his message is contagious. Because when workers recognize themselves as the backbone of the economy, corporate power starts to look smaller, more fragile, more artificial. And that realization, that awakening, is the beginning of a much bigger shift. A shift we dive into next, how this moment fits into a national wave that's been building for years. If you think the panic around Zohran Mamdani is just about one politician or one set of policies, you're missing the real story. What's happening right now is part of a national pattern, a slow, steady, undeniable shift in American public consciousness. And corporate America has seen this shift coming for years. They've been preparing for it, rehearsing for it, building defenses for it. Because they knew this moment would eventually arrive. You can trace the beginning of this shift back to workers themselves. Look at what's been happening across the country: rising unionization, public frustration with billionaires, and workers at Amazon, Starbucks, REI, Apple, Trader Joe's, industries that were once impossible to organize, beginning to stand up and demand rights. That's not random. That's not spontaneous. That's a pressure cooker finally exploding after decades of silent resentment. We're watching baristas, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, people who were told for years their jobs were unskilled, suddenly realize the entire economy collapses without them. And corporate America? They know the numbers better than anyone else. They saw union membership crash in the 1980s after massive corporate political campaigns. They saw corporate PACs rise, flooding Washington with money, shaping labor laws, and slowly weakening worker protections. For 40 years, CEOs operated in a comfortable vacuum. Workers disorganized, politicians dependent on donations, unions shrinking. But over the past 5 to 7 years, something flipped. Poll after poll started showing that Americans overwhelmingly support unions, especially young workers. Support for raising the minimum wage? Majority. Support for taxing corporations fairly? Majority. Support for ending corporate loopholes and increasing worker benefits? Overwhelming majority. The public wasn't buying the corporate narrative anymore. And that terrified the boardrooms. Because once public opinion shifts, politics follows. That's where Mamdani enters the story. CEOs don't fear him as an individual. That would be too personal, too emotional. No, they fear what he represents, a new generation of lawmakers who speak the one word American politics has avoided for decades: class. He says it out loud. He names the power imbalance. He identifies who benefits and who pays the price. And that breaks the decades-long unspoken agreement between corporate America and its political allies. Don't tell workers how the system actually works. Mamdani challenges the one thing CEOs depend on most: normalization. The normalization of the struggle. The normalization of living paycheck to paycheck. The normalization of working 2 jobs and still falling behind. The normalization of choosing between rent and groceries, between medicine and bills, between a day off and a shattered back. He speaks to the people who feel this pressure in their bones, the parent working a double shift just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. The young worker sharing a living room couch because rent swallowed their paycheck. The warehouse worker who hit their 10th hour on a concrete floor while their company announced record profits. When someone like Mamdani connects those stories to policy, when he says, "This isn't an accident, this is a structure," that's when the panic at the top becomes real. Because once workers understand that their suffering isn't personal failure but a political choice, everything changes. The corporate model depends entirely on workers believing that the struggle is natural, inevitable, part of life. But Mamdani rejects that idea. He says, "No, this is manufactured. And we can manufacture it." If you want to know how powerful institutions behave when they feel their authority slipping, don't look at their speeches. Look at their counterattacks. And in the weeks after Zohran Mamdani pushed his worker-first policies, corporate America didn't just fight back. They deployed every tool in their arsenal, every technique they've perfected over decades of keeping workers in check. Because this is what corporations do. When someone threatens their narrative, they don't debate. They strategize. The first tactic is always lobbying muscle. Corporate lobbyists swarmed state legislators, holding closed-door meetings, quietly warning them that Mamdani's proposals would destabilize the business climate. It's ironic. Workers are told to be transparent, honest, and upfront with employers. But corporations? They conduct politics like a shadow war. Phone calls, private dinners, political pressure packaged behind polite smiles. Then comes the ad buy offensive. Suddenly, you start seeing concerned business coalitions running ads about how reckless policies could cost jobs. They never mention which policies. They never show evidence. They just want to plant fear, like a seed, in the public mind. Because if workers feel uneasy, they are less likely to support reforms that actually benefit them. But the most predictable attack is the one I call manufactured fear. It's the corporate version of a horror movie. CEOs warn that wages might go up, and then jobs will vanish into thin air. They warn that safer scheduling might be implemented, and companies will be forced to shut down. All without a single shred of empirical data. The same CEOs who automate jobs for profit suddenly pretend automation is a worker safety decision. The hypocrisy is almost theatrical. And when fear alone doesn't work, corporations turn to their oldest tactic, divide and rule. They whisper to certain groups of workers, "If we raise wages for them, your hours will shrink. If we help gig workers, your benefits will suffer. If we support unions, your workplace flexibility will die." It's a strategic lie, one designed to create resentment between workers who should be allies. Because nothing scares corporate America more than workers recognizing they are on the same team. Then comes data distortion, the art of cherry-picking. Corporations pull one obscure statistic, strip it of context, and present it like gospel. Look at this one study from 2009. They'll say, higher wages led to reduced youth employment. They won't mention the dozens of studies showing the opposite. They won't mention that their own company reported record profits last quarter. They won't mention their executive bonuses. Because their goal isn't truth. It's confusion. And confusion is emotional manipulation. The corporate playbook is designed to make workers fear change more than they fear exploitation. They want the average person to think, maybe things are bad, but what if pushing for better makes it worse? That hesitation, that seed of doubt, is worth more to them than any ad campaign. And corporate groups will use anything to trigger it. Chambers of commerce warn that innovation will suffer. Political operatives call Mamdani anti-business. Corporate-funded think tanks produce long, jargon-filled reports about economic danger, knowing full well that most people won't read past the first paragraph. But here's the truth that slips through no matter how much they spend on messaging. You don't fight this hard against something that isn't a threat. If Mamdani's policies were meaningless, CEOs wouldn't care. If they posed no risk to corporate power, lobbyists wouldn't sprint through Capitol hallways. If workers weren't waking up, there wouldn't be a coordinated national backlash. The ferocity of the response tells you everything. They are not fighting the proposals, they are fighting the shift in power those proposals represent. If you step back and look at the larger story, not the hearings, not the statements, not the talking points, but the emotion behind corporate outrage, you'll notice something extraordinary. Their panic isn't just a reaction to one politician or one proposal. It's a signal, a hint, a tremor beneath the surface of American politics. It tells us the country is entering a new ideological era, one where workers are no longer apologizing for wanting a fair share of the wealth they create. For decades, people were told they should feel lucky to have a job at all. Lucky to work weekends. Lucky to sacrifice family time. Lucky to make just enough to survive. But now, more and more Americans are saying, we deserve better, and we're not ashamed to say it. That shift terrifies CEOs because it exposes a truth they worked hard to bury. Prosperity isn't created in boardrooms. It's created on loading docks, in kitchens, in hospitals, in classrooms, in delivery vans, and in every unseen corner where regular people hold the country together. And this awakening forces us to confront two competing futures. Future 1, the corporate-led America. In this version, workers remain replaceable, wages remain stagnant, and the economy is treated like a machine whose only purpose is to extract profit. Corporations continue to automate labor, cut corners, outsource jobs, and frame any attempt at fairness as dangerous. People are told to work harder, complain less, and accept struggle as normal. Families live with uncertainty, one paycheck away from crisis, while corporate profits hit historic highs. This is the future CEOs want. Predictable, controlled, quiet. Future 2, the worker-led America. This one is different. In this version, dignity becomes a baseline expectation, not a reward, not a luxury. Policies center the value of human labor, not shareholder convenience. Communities benefit from the wealth they help generate. Workers have a say in how the economy functions, not just the scraps left after decisions are made. This is the future Mamdani's policies point toward. Not because he's the hero, but because he's part of a wave. A wave of warehouse workers striking for safer conditions. A wave of baristas unionizing for the first time in Starbucks history. A wave of younger lawmakers asking the one forbidden question in American politics: who is the economy actually for? Mamdani isn't leading this movement, he's reflecting it. He's holding a microphone to a frustration millions of people have felt silently for years. That's why CEOs panic. Not because of the legislation itself, but because they can see a future where the old playbook no longer works. And the emotional stakes of this moment couldn't be higher. This isn't just about wages or benefits or scheduling practices. This is about what kind of country we want our families to grow up in. Do we want a society where people work themselves to exhaustion just to stay afloat? Where children see their parents sacrifice everything and still fall behind? Where the American dream is reserved only for those already born close to it? Or do we want a country where work is honored, where stability is possible, where prosperity feels shared rather than hoarded? Because here's the truth CEOs hope you never realize. The real threat isn't Mamdani. The real threat is a public that's waking up. When workers begin to see themselves not as replaceable cogs but as the authors of the economy, the ones who make every industry possible, corporate panic becomes more than a reaction. It becomes a confession. A confession that the old system is cracking. A confession that people are thinking differently. A confession that democracy, economic democracy, might finally be catching up to political democracy.